me start with Honorable Kendapa. Honorable Kendapa, if you can hear me, should the clashes happening in parts of the country be treated as ordinary, or must we link them together and look them as a serious issue for the country? Oh, sorry, we lost Honorable Kendapa. Okay, let me start with you, Mr. Diallo. Honorable Kendapa, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Yeah, thank you for coming on PM Express. I want to ask you this question. Should the clashes happening in the parts of the country be treated as ordinary, or must we link them together and look at them as a serious issue?
Well, I don't know whether there is any direct link between the various crises that we have in various places. But I think any disturbance is something that must be taken seriously, and we need to find a way of resolving such matters.
Thank you. It seems that most of the time when these incidents happen, time and again, we don't see any prosecutions coming out of it. Do you think it has anything to do with the clashes that we are seeing, even though they are not related? However, since they are not, people are not being prosecuted for their actions, that has anything to do with what is going on?
You know, I believe we should leave the decisions, such decisions as to prosecute or not to prosecute in such cases, to the security agencies. Most times they have to take so many things into account before they take a decision as to whether to prosecute or not. And I think we should allow the security agencies the liberty to determine which cases should be prosecuted and those which should not be prosecuted. The important thing, in my opinion, is that we're doing very, very well in this country. We're doing very, very well. And the only problem that can stop us from making even better progress is lack of peace. It is therefore important that as a nation, we find a way to invest in peace and ensure that we have peace in our country at all times. We should find a way to resource and the security agencies to be able to resolve any crisis wherever they come up. We should be able to resource, for instance, the Ghana Peace Council to be able to play the role that it has been playing. We should not take peace for granted. We're doing very well. Lack of peace has not been a major problem, but it clearly can be a significant problem for us. And I think it is appropriate that we have this at the back of our mind at all times.
Thank you. But so far, it seems we get the impression that people have maybe lost hope in the security apparatus and they are resorting to self-defense. Is this a fair statement?
No, I'm not very sure. I still have confidence in the security agencies. I know they have very, very difficult jobs to do most times. I'm not very sure whether we give them the necessary financial support for them to empower themselves to be able to respond meaningfully to some of these problems that come up from time to time. But, you know, I think they are doing very well. Most times it's difficult to understand them, to understand why they did what they did. But they are the professionals, and most times they know what the right thing is. It may not quite be in line with your own views as to how it should be handled. But let's grant them the fact that they are the experts and should know what is to be done.
Yeah, the National Peace Council says it is too early to sound alarm bells and about possible clashes in December, since we are going to have elections. Do you share that sentiment?
I think so. I think I will agree with the National Peace Council that it's too early to conclude that things are getting out of hand. No, things are not getting out of hand. But it's a reminder that we must be on the lookout. We must be prepared to confront any problems that arise in the area of peace or lack of it.
Honorable Kandapa, thank you for joining us on,
Thank you.
on PM Express. Thank you. Have a good night, sir. Also on the phone, we have Ms. Afi Yakubu. Good evening, Ms. Afi Yakubu.
Good evening.
Yeah, thank you for joining us tonight. Yeah,
It's my pleasure.
thank you. I will start with you tonight, Mr. Diallo. Since you are Francophone and living in Ghana, how do you see what is going on in Ghana today?
What I see in terms of the pockets of violence that we've witnessed, especially in the last 2 weeks, is just a wake-up call that even though Ghana is a very peaceful country, and Ghana is also leading in terms of democratization in West Africa, and stakeholders should not be complacent. The price for peace is not cheap, so people should be up and doing and working assiduously to resolve these conflicts. And we've seen a very swift intervention of the security agencies, which is a very good sign, and they're able to contain the violence. And that is very important because in any conflict situation, you need to create the enabling environment for experts to work with the communities and resolve the conflict. And that is not possible when there's fighting. So it is appreciated that the security agencies are able to contain the violence, and this will then open the space for the National Peace Council, civil society, the religious leaders, and all stakeholders to come on board and work with the communities, because the communities that are in conflict have the solutions to the conflict. What is needed is just to create the platform where they can sit down and dialogue. But once they are fighting, once the tension is high, without the support of a third party, it becomes difficult for them to engage in the dialogue.
So how safe are we this election year?
I believe Ghana is very safe. Every election has its challenges. You cannot judge an election on the basis of the past elections. But what we've seen so far is that when there is an issue, everybody is concerned and everybody is talking about peace, yes, and everybody is doing something to make sure that the situation is corrected. So that is a very good signal. So people are not pretending all is well. People are talking about the issues in the media, people are engaging with the stakeholders, and that is the way forward. So for me, I think even though we are seeing these pockets of violence, and I believe they've happened very early, it is unfortunate they are happening, but it is also an opportunity for everybody to work to make sure that they are corrected before we get to December.
Yeah, so is it safe for us to think that these are just isolated cases and they are not linked in any way?
Every conflict has its peculiarities. Unless an assessment is conducted to understand the causes of the conflict, it will not be easy to link them. But they should not also be discarded as insignificant. They should be taken seriously and resolved in a very comprehensive manner to ensure that it's not just suppressing the peace. When there's violence, we go there, we separate the parties and we enforce the peace. After that, that's an important step, but after that, there's need to work with the communities to empower them to own the process of resolving the conflict through dialogue and non-peaceful and non-violent means.
Thank you. Ms. Yakubu.
Yes.
Yeah, how do you, let me come to you. How do you see this pocket of violence going on in the country?
It's quite a worrying sign, and I think it's also a wake-up call that Ghana should not take the peace we are enjoying now for granted. And it's also quite encouraging that when these conflicts erupt, we see our security agencies reacting and mobilizing swiftly. But we expect them to do more intelligence work and be more proactive, be able to pick up the early warning signs in order to avert these conflicts. There may be pockets of conflict, but what is worrying is the fact that they are popping up from all angles, all of a sudden. That gives cause to worry. The Upper West region is struggling with this chieftaincy conflict now. The northern region, the Bumprugu area, is struggling with an ethnic conflict. And all of a sudden, a traditional and religious conflict is popping up in the Volta region. You know, I think it's a sign for us to be very concerned about.
Yeah, you mentioned about intelligence on the ground. Does it mean that our intelligence agencies, most of the time, they are caught off guard, they are caught by surprise? Because when these things pop up before they react to what is going on?
I don't want to jump to that conclusion because I don't work with them. Some of these issues, no matter how prepared you are, can be quite overwhelming. But the fact that they are able to activate the system and move in to check it, to contain it, means that they are also working behind the scenes. What I'm saying is that we expect them to do more in terms of intelligence gathering and also picking up early warning signs. But I'm not saying that they are not doing anything. They are working. The fact that they are able to move out into the communities and contain the conflict is something that is worth commending them on.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Diallo, let me come back to you. OneUp is describing these clashes as a tip of the iceberg. Do you foresee bigger problems coming?
I don't think that's the right description because, you know, this is a report of early warning, and early warning is not a prophecy, and early warning is not to give alarmist reports. What early warning does is to pick incidences of conflicts and then do the analysis and present it in a way that it can be interpreted to give you a signal about what needs to be done early enough to prevent the escalation of conflict. So these are early warning signals, and what this means is that response options should now be formulated at this stage to address the issues that are popping up as pockets of violence and deal with these issues in a comprehensive manner to make sure that the root causes are addressed and the parties that are involved are engaged, they are part of the process, and they own the process of agreeing as to the way forward about how they resolve the conflict in their communities. So early warning, the one OneUp is operating, we have two types of reports. We have the incident report. When an incident occurs, it is reported. And we have the situation report. Whether there's an incident or not, at the end of a week, you look at the peace and security environment, and then you do the analysis and you report to show whether the factors that are favorable factors for peace are outweighing the factors for conflict. And you then do what we call a policy brief to inform policymakers about what needs to be done. So we cannot say this is the tip of the iceberg because nobody can predict the conflict. But what we are saying is that the signs we are picking are important signs that everybody needs to take into consideration, and we need to work together addressing the issues with all stakeholders on board supporting the security agencies in terms of providing early warning information, because the police also needs the support of the civilians. And Ghana should embark on what is called community policing. And it is in the interest of everybody for peace and security to prevail. So everybody should pay attention to these signals, and when you see anything that is wrong, make sure that it is reported to the appropriate authorities for remedy. But we cannot say we are predicting more conflict or doom, but what we are saying is that these are signals that need to be addressed now to make sure that by the time we get to December, we have a more peaceful environment that will allow the elections to be organized in a more peaceful and credible way that will
you talk about early signals. How do we see these early signals in our communities? Because if you look at what happened at Ekunfi in the central region, or even Volta region, how can you see that coming? Well,
and that is the essence of involving the communities themselves in monitoring the issues. Because when you are doing early warning, it's not an intelligence gathering. But if the communities are part of the situation, if somebody in that community were there when the issues started to erupt, and that could have been signaled early enough before the violence erupts. And the early warning program that is being implemented has not been rolled out countrywide. It has been implemented in 7 regions in Ghana.
Only 7?
Yeah.
So do you think it's time to roll it out across the country?
Absolutely. It is very important, because what early warning does is to promote the culture of conflict prevention. And it is not only to pick the signals, but you also build capacities for response. And these capacities are not only built at the level of state institutions. You work with the local communities. They can establish local peace committees. And the National Peace Council, I think in its mandate, has also the responsibility to establish local structures that will deal with issues of peace and security. So you work with them in gathering the indicators or the information related to peace and security. You also work with the communities in providing the rapid response, because the essence of early warning is for the issue to be addressed before it escalates.
Yeah, Ms. Yakubu, if I may come to you. Ms. Yakubu, are you there? Oh, I think we lost Ms. Yakubu. We're talking about, let's go back to the early warning signs. For instance, as I said, if you look at what happened in Ekunfi or Volta region, I don't see how you can see that there's something brewing, especially in Ekunfi or Volta region. But these chieftaincy things, we know it has been there. Yeah. So you think it's time for us to spread these early warning systems across the country?
Yes.
And will that help the police response? Because most of the time you see that when these things happens, there's a lot of destruction before the police shows up.
Exactly, and that is what we don't want to happen. So that when the information is generated early enough, it is shared with the relevant authorities, the relevant stakeholders, with the responsibility to respond. And in so doing, like when the national early warning system is established countrywide, there should be partnership about how and who should access the data, the information that is generated. And also, depending on the severity of the issue that has been identified, then you can also know where to report this information. And we can work with the communities, because if the communities have access to mobile phones, it will be very easy.
I think mobile phones today are very common.
Exactly. Yeah. Then the system we have, you can use toll-free numbers to send an SMS, and it will hit the screen, and automatically the analyst will follow up to understand the details about what has happened, and it will then be reported. So that is why early warning is the way forward in terms of conflict prevention. Yeah.
Ms. Yakubu.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for joining us again. I was asking about this early warning signs, as Mr. Diallo is explaining to us tonight. How do we see these early warning signs? For instance, if you see what happened at Ekunfi or Volta region, how can we address these early warning signs?
I think it requires a lot of community involvement and communities' understanding of their role in keeping peace. And so to have a very effective early warning mechanism, it requires organizations such as ONEP, and I know they've done a lot of work, done good research, reached out to communities, trained civil society to be able to pick up these, signals, early warning signals, and then transmit them to the requisite security agencies. Once those information or signals are transmitted to the security agencies, I think that the responsibility then lies within the responsible security body to ensure that they are able to intervene to avert any deterioration of the situation. So I think that early warning mechanisms are very, very useful, and especially in this period of our elections, we have to ensure that all the partners that we have who will help the Electoral Commission, who will help the security agencies to be able to track some of these signals are well resourced. Otherwise, it would be an exercise in futility if we have all these structures in place and yet we are not able to grasp some of these signals early enough to utilize them for the benefit of community. So I want to emphasize again that collective responsibility, is a very good tool if we want the early warning mechanisms to work.
Yeah, thank you. But let me ask you this question, because I asked the same question to Honorable Kendapa. We see time and time and again in Ghana that this crisis will come up, and we don't see people getting punished for it. Does that mean that, is it possible that this is giving people the impression that whatever we do, we get away with it so we can go ahead and riot or get into these conflicts when these things come up?
It's a very difficult question for me because, I don't know which criminal will commit a crime, be sent to court and released without a reason. So it's difficult for us to conclude that they go unpunished.
No, what I'm saying...
Perhaps the wheel of justice is slower than we expect it to be. And, well, these are some of the prices we have to pay for democracy. We have to allow the wheel of justice to ground.
No, I did not say that they go and they are released. No. What I'm saying is that most of the time we don't see any prosecutions. So people think that if they get involved with rioting, they can get away with it. I'm not saying they go to court and they get released. No.
Okay. I don't know how to answer that question sincerely. I have to be honest with you. But all I know is that if people go rioting and they are not punished, it's a sign of deterioration towards anarchy. And I don't think that any government or state institution responsible for law and order will supervise over anarchy.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Gerald, let me come to you. When you look at the police response to these riots, most of the time, as I said, sometimes by the time they get there, things have already gotten out of hand. So how will these early systems help? You mentioned something about text messaging. How can we control that? Because is it 2 years ago, there was a test that there was an earthquake coming? and it caused a lot of confusion. So how can we control that and track it?
Control
this, if we have these early systems in place, saying that we have like something like text messaging, people can send text messaging. How do we control that?
Well, that is, you have a systems manager. So the information that is received at the center is not available to everybody. It has to be analyzed by the analyst before, because it is raw data that you are receiving from the field. So you have to analyze it first before you share it as an information. So the system is not just accessible to everybody like that. Before you get access, there are codes you need to have. So it is restricted. So in terms of controlling rumors, because sometimes people might share information that might be a cause for panic, and there are mechanisms developed within the system to deal with that through the employment of a sound analyst who has the skills to look at the raw data that is coming from the field, do a thorough verification before it is then put out in the public domain for consumption or shared with the stakeholders for action. You know,
the sign I'm getting from you and Ms. Yakubu is that, you know, there's no cause for alarm. But how do you address that to the average Ghanaian? Because for the past week, even the last 3 weeks, if you consider that about 91 houses has been burnt in Northern region alone, and then what went on in Volta region, if you look at the daily graphic today, the front page, how do you tell the average Ghanaian that you shouldn't worry, everything is okay? How do you address that? I know you are not a government official, but I know OneUp, you do a lot of work. So
exactly,
how do you address things like that?
And we are not saying people should not be worried about these issues. That's what we are saying, is that we should look at what is happening, and everybody should pay attention to these signs, and everybody should take them seriously and work towards addressing this conflict. It is unfortunate that people are resorting to the use of violence, because whatever happens, there are laid down procedures for people to address their complaints. So what is required? This is a democracy. So what is required is for people to understand that in a democracy, there are laid down rules and regulations. And these rules and regulations are the guiding principles for harmony in the society. And that is why it is important for the security agencies to be very effective in dealing with these issues and also investigating the matters and working with the judicial system to make sure that perpetrators of violence are brought to book and held to account for their deeds. And I don't think people should neglect these signs. They are serious, but what we are saying is that it is not a doom prediction. They are happening. It is unfortunate. It is early, and this is the time for people to address them, to make sure that by the time we get to December, the environment is now conducive for
the election. Northern Regional Minister made a statement, actually today, that he thinks that the conflict in the North is politically motivated. Since you do a lot of work in the North, do you share with that statement? Do you think what he said is there's something to it?
Well, what I can say is there are various causes to conflicts. I don't know the particular conflict he's talking about. It could be true that some of the conflicts have political undertones, but there are also other underlying causes. And I think there are other causes. Even if politics has permeated in these conflicts, but deep down, if you look at them, some of them are, they have their own causes. But I don't know the specific case you are talking about, and I cannot confirm or deny that.
Yeah, Ms. Yakubu. Yeah, I think we lost Ms. Yeah,
hello.
Yeah, Ms. Yakubu. Thank you for joining. thank you for joining us again. I just want to ask you the same question that the statement made by the Northern Region Minister today, that the conflict in the North is politically motivated.
Well, I don't want to totally agree with the Honorable Regional Minister, because we know that we have ethnic conflict in the North. We know that the chieftaincy conflict in the North are historical conflicts. And yes, political, interests and political influences may be infiltrating into these latent unsolved conflicts. But we should not draw the conclusion that the conflict in the North is generally politically motivated. If we study the conflict trends in the North, you would realize that most of the time they come to the hills around farming season, whether they are ethnic conflicts or chieftaincy conflicts. So it has to do with resources too. And even if they are political in nature, you would realize that at the bottom of it is also an issue of survival and somebody eating and another person feeling hungry. And so they are interrelated. The conflicts in the North are quite interrelated. They are resource related. They are chieftaincy related, have a lot to do with power and ethnicity.
Also, I want to ask you this. So does that mean that our civil society is not doing enough to educate Ghanaians how to go about these conflicts when they come about?
Well, I know that ONEF and FOSA are doing a lot. And I know that ONEF and FOSA are not the only civil society organizations working on peace and security, which tells us that maybe the issues are much more than the resources are available, to address them. But civil society certainly is working. All we can say is that we need extra resource to support the cause, and we also have to call on the media, because whether we like it or not, the media institutions have become a force to be reckoned with. And so if they were also to dedicate a percentage of their airtime to help what civil society on the ground is already doing, I think it will go a long way to support the cause on promoting peace and security.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Diallo, what do you think what role do you think the media can play in this by educating the Ghanaian people?
Yeah, the media can play a very critical role because people depend on the media for information, and when issues are happening, it is the media that provides the information and also the platform for people to debate about the issues. So it is important for the media to embark on conflict-sensitive journalism. That is, whatever you are doing as a journalist, you have to be sensitive to the issues around you and make sure that your reportage is not fueling the conflict. And you have to make sure that whatever you do is promoting the peace. So the media is a critical stakeholder in promoting peace in Ghana. And we've seen instances where the media was used as a tool to perpetuate violence. So on the contrary, in Ghana, we are seeing engagement on media platforms to address issues of violence, which is a good sign. And civil society, as you said, have been working in the northern region to support communities that are in conflict. But sometimes the irony of peace-building work is that when there is peace, people don't notice that you are working. It is only when there is violence and people call and say, hey, what is happening? But even when there's violence, the interventions that are also carried out are very effective in the sense that they are mitigating the consequences of the violence. The only challenge I notice in the peace processes is that follow-up mechanisms are very limited. They will engage the parties, bring them to a negotiation table, they will talk and have a roadmap or an agreement, but when they go back, it will take a year or two, and until a violence erupts again, it is not consistent. So what is required is when you engage a community that is in conflict and you work with them to identify the causes of the conflict, and you work with them also to identify the solutions which they have as parties in the conflict, and agree on the way forward, which will then be the outcome of the engagement, which is a signed agreement between the parties about what they need to do to bring about peace in the community. That is not the end of the dialogue. So when they go back, follow-up mechanisms should be part and parcel of that process, that every 6 months or every 3 months, they should come back together to look at what have they done to implement the peace process, and what are their challenges, and what can be done to overcome these challenges, and what can be done to sustain the achievement they'll be able to make. And in so doing, if we are consistent and the resources are made available, we'll go a long way in dealing with these issues and solve them once and for all in a sustainable manner.
Yeah, in fact, I was coming to ask you about that question, so just hold that thought. Let me read some of our text messages from our viewers, and let me share this with the viewers, and then we come back to that. I think that's very interesting. Victor Odami Asante says, I think all is due to polarization. Every single issue in Ghana is politicized. An example is the words and reaction of the Central Regional Minister, Alfred Mystery Abebio. We should really be concerned. The clashes here and there are so worrying that if care is not taken, we will have ourselves to blame. This election is going to be the litmus test for Ghana's democracy, with these isolated clashes being early signs. Charles E. Stevens, what I think is we should watch and mind our speech, and the media today also have a major role to play, because the information and the education that they give to the public should always be accurate and not misleading and misinterpreting news. Charles from Takrade. Alfred Abebio sent this again. I think the media houses have a major role to play in putting a stop to all this. They misinterpret news, making affected communities become agitated. They must be careful the sort of information they put out. I want to ask you, because you touch on it a little bit. When these incidents happen, for instance, in Ekumfi, where it's ethnic based, West Infantis, when you go to Hohoi, it had some religious undertones. So after everything has settled down and we assume there is peace, what do we do afterwards to make sure that people's feelings will not be flared again?
Exactly. What we need to do is to continue to engage the communities. You know, there's a saying that if a community has been involved in conflict for a number of years, it requires the same number of years for it to overcome the challenges that were brought about by the conflict. So there's no quick solution. Once they've agreed to talk, that is a very important step. And that is why third parties are needed to support them in that process. If they can agree to talk on their own, that's the best solution. But if the tension, the suspicion, the fear, the hatred is very high.
When you say they agree to talk on their own, are you saying without mediators? How can these people are fighting each other, how can they come back and say we are going to resolve this on our own? Definitely,
they can. It just requires skills and understanding that when there's an issue, you know, a conflict is a social situation wherein at least two parties are competing for the same goal at the same time. So when you compete for the same goal at the same time, you should establish procedures about how to attain that. And that is why in elections, like election in itself is a conflict. And that is why we have election management bodies. We have laid down rules and regulations that we will use to make sure that you access power through these procedures. So if there's an issue between two communities, they need to sit down and think. When you sit down and think, you have the solution. And you look at the interest of the larger community rather than looking at your own personal interest. Because, you know, in dialogue, what you seek to do is not to convince your opponent, but you seek to explore, understanding the conflict from your opponent's perspective.
So that's where leadership will come in.
That is where leadership will come in. And that is where you also have to think about the future generations. As leaders, what legacy do you want to leave? When you are no more there, what community do you want your children to live in? You know, you ask these questions and you look at the larger interest, the interest of the larger society, and you take decisions that will be beneficial to everybody, especially in the long run. But usually when people are fighting for resources and they think it is not enough for everybody, it could be enough. It's just that they have not thought about how to invest the resources and how to make good use of the resources to make sure that they maximize the profit and outcome of the use of the resources.
Yeah, Ms. Yakubu. Ms. Yakubu.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to come to you. How do we get Ghanaians to understand that when there are problems, they should first of all get to the police first before they take matters into their own hands? How do we go about that?
No, I think it has a lot to do with public sensitization and public education. It is not a responsibility that civil society alone should be handling, but I think the government has a bigger role to play in that. The Ministry of Information, for instance, is the mouth of the government, and it should be developing programs that will educate and sensitize our communities, you know, on some of these matters of public interest. And apart from that, we also have to recognize the greater role of our communities, the traditional institutions within our communities. The chieftaincy institution, we know that is highly revered. The religious heads in our communities, you know, we know are highly respected. Even the youth groups. So these are some of the groups that we think we have to get on board. They should be the first in line to be sensitized in order to be able to help the state disseminate peace and conflict management in their community. This is how I think we should handle it.
Yeah, but when we look at, Mr. Diallo says something that if these people can come back again and talk, because it seems most of the time we are, as a people, we are not quick to get the police involved when there are issues until it gets out of hand. So does that mean we are not doing enough?
No, I don't think that's what Mr. Diallo said. I think what Mr. Diallo meant was that it is very necessary to sustain any little peace that is arrived at. And in order to do that, we have to ensure that the feudal factions still engage, still talk, they interact, and they work towards peace. And to do this alone is not an easy process. They would always certainly need a neutral third party, you know, who would facilitate the process. Yes, it's a very painful, slow process, and that is what we are not very good at pursuing. As soon as the sound of the gun goes silent, we think that we have achieved peace. And then we withdraw. Maybe we withdraw for convenience because of the lack of resources that I mentioned. But the important message here, is to ensure that we still continue to work with the communities and accompany them through the reconstruction and peace building. And that takes a very long and expensive process. But I keep saying that, no matter how expensive the peace process is not as expensive as war.
So does it mean we are not spending enough money?
Not only money.
Yeah.
It's resources in general. It's trained personnel with good expertise and for both civil society and government and our community leaders. I think that if we were to work with them, for them to really appreciate their role as peacekeepers, we would have been solving the problem halfway. So we should develop mechanisms that are community-oriented in peace building so that every person, leader of a community of a sort, recognizes his or her role as a custodian of peace in their community.
Yeah, Ms. Yakubu, you see, we in Ghana here, we pride ourselves as a peace-loving country. But now, if within a short period of time you see everything that is happening, how do we go back and rebuild that confidence in ourselves that we're a peace-loving nation?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying that it's sad that all of a sudden we seem to be inundated by all sorts of conflicts around it. But I still want to believe that Ghanaians are peace-loving, and the voices of reason are drowning the voices of those sounding war drums. And that is very important. The fact that almost everybody is talking about it shows the character of the Ghanaian as a peace-loving person. And at the end of the day, we have to pledge to vote for peace instead of voting for war. Whether we have elections or not, our option is to go for peace. And so we still should pride ourselves in the fact that we are peace-loving people, but that should not make us complacent. We have to continue working at it.
Yeah, Mr. Diallo, let me come back to you here.
Yeah.
As we go forward, what are some of the things that we need to put in place to make sure that these things does not come up towards December? Because if you see the text messages coming, people are worried about what may happen in December.
I would say two things. First of all, intensify the education, the non-violent peace education and civic education, because since this is an election year, and also work with the communities and assist them in the process of resolving the conflict, because they need to be supported, and they need to be also educated to understand that as long as they embark on violence, their communities will be deprived, because the resources that will be meant for developmental projects will be diverted for peacekeeping and other purposes to maintain peace and security. So educating them and bringing about programs, developmental programs in exchange for peace will also be one way forward. And letting them understand that they are getting these developmental programs as a result of agreeing to use non-violent means to solve their problems. And it starts with the individual in terms of the personal transformation and the personal commitment to peace and the personal commitment to work for peaceful elections. So every Ghanaian has to take this election as not only an election for Ghana, but it is an election for Africa. And Ghana played a very significant role during the fight for liberation struggle. And Ghana was the first independent African country in sub-Saharan Africa. And today, if you look at the trends again, Ghana is also leading in terms of consolidating its democratic practice. And even though the election in 2008 had some pockets of violence, but the outcome was very peaceful, and we saw the dividends. When Barack Obama was elected president of the USA, he chose Ghana as the first country he would visit in sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, let's hold that thought and let's go for a short break. We'll be back and continue the discussion. Mr. Diallo, our time is almost up, so let me start with Ms. Yakubu so that we can wrap this up. Ms. Yakubu.
Yes.
Yeah, going forward, what can you tell Ghanaians, and what are some of the things that you recommend we do going forward?
I think I'll just have to revisit some of the points that I've made already, and that we have to recognize that our national security is a collective responsibility, and everybody, every Ghanaian has to work towards that. And to mention the specific institutions that should lead us include the media, civil society, our traditional leadership. By that I mean the religious bodies, the chieftaincy institution, and the community-based organizations, and the overarching responsibility, of course, lies with government. But they cannot do that alone without the support of the general public. So that is my suggestion for way forward, and we should all be the watchers of early warning signs. But we also have to advocate for an information collection point. Even if intelligence is picked up and people do not know where to direct them, so it will not be well addressed. So we should encourage the security agency to be more available so that the public will be able to approach them and then provide security, useful security that will go to enhance our peace.
Thank you, Ms. Yakubu. Mr. Diallo, as going forward, what do we do? I know we have just about a minute to go.
Yes, as we go forward, what we need to do is to understand that the elections in Ghana in 2012 are very important, not only for Ghana, but for the whole of Africa. And everybody should take it as a personal commitment to work for peace. And I also want to emphasize that the National Peace Council, as a national structure that has the mandate to work on peace and security, should be given the resources they need to establish their local structures and work in partnership with civil society and the local communities in resolving the conflict we are seeing today. And the police, the security agencies should be equipped with more logistics to make sure that they are more effective in their responses in dealing with pockets of violence.
Thank you, Mr. Diallo and Ms. Yakubu. Thank you for joining us on PM Express.
You're welcome.
In crisis like this, I think as a nation, the media will have a role to play. And we know we are doing our part and we can do more.
Sure.
Also, in crisis like this, I think we need leadership. Our elected officials, they need to talk to the nation. They need to tell Ghanaians everything is going to be okay. Time and again, Ghanaians, they are afraid. When you see what is going on in the media today, people talking about the incident happening in Volta, all over the country, I think the time has come for our leaders to assure us as a people that everything is going to be okay going through to December. Also, as a people, we need to protect the peace that we have in the country. As a nation, we have no other place to call home but Ghana. and we need to protect that peace in this country.